Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here on a Friday morning, afternoon, evening for some, late night for those in India and South Asia. This is the fourth in our series around Post Capitalist Philanthropy. The session today is focused on other ways of knowing and being, and we're going to talk about transition pathways, lived possibilities that are happening right now, what we often call coordinates of possibility. And we have three amazing allies, siblings here with us today that we're going to introduce shortly. And maybe I'll just talk a little bit about the format for the day, so, and some housekeeping logistics. If everybody could just keep their Zoom on mute, that would be great, just so there's no like static interference in the background. And what we're going to do is Lynn and I will just do a little bit of orientation for 5 minutes or so. And then we're going to open it up to our sister, Pat McCabe, who's one of the speakers, who's going to do an opening prayer for us. And then we'll introduce her properly after that. Yeah, so if everyone could just keep their computers on mute. So yeah, we'll introduce Pat after, so we're not, projecting the Parabox identity onto her while she's doing her prayer. And then what we'll do is Pat is going to share for about 20 minutes. We'll take a little pause. We'll introduce Marai Larasi, who's with us, and for about 20 minutes. And then we'll do the same with Ashish Kothari, who's calling in from India. And then we will have a little bit of dialogue between Lynn and I and the three of them, so the five of us. We'll just have a little Q&A and they can ask each other questions, and then we'll open it up to the group. And you can put your hands up through the Zoom function, or you could type your question in the box if that works for you. And again, we're trying to invoke good mystical anarchist etiquette. So we're going to ask people not to do social locating and plugging their NGOs and such, but really just ask a question, no theses and what have you. So just really like a question. And if you want a particular speaker to answer that question, you can just say that, or if it's just open to the group, you can just let us know as well. So I think that's it for housekeeping stuff. Lynn, did I miss anything?
Nope, that was great. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Good day to all of you, wherever you are sitting. Maybe before I locate us in our inquiry today, I feel to just ask Pat if she wants to begin us in prayer, and then I'll locate us with our inquiry today. So Pat.
Yate, good morning. Good day, good afternoon, good evening to each and every one of you relatives. Really, really honored to be here. Really grateful that we're having this conversation on this beautiful sacred day. Speaking today from the Tohono O'odham territory, Pima Yaqui Nation territory. So just acknowledging all of their love and care relationship with this part of the sweet Mother Earth here. And yeah, I wanted to, I don't normally read prayer, but I feel to read this prayer that has been coming and that I've been working with for some time now, so I'll share it with you. Together we make a place where thriving life, where future, where what is holy can meet, align, harmonize, and have access to our construct that we call money. Where all that has been extracted from the Mother Earth, from the bodies of men, women, and children, from the body of the oceans, from the sky, from the bodies of the flying ones, the swimming ones, the creepy crawly ones, the four-legged ones, from the plants, from the standing nation, the trees, from the stones, from the soil, from the waters, from the internal organs of the Mother Earth, coal, gold, oil. From the five-fingered one's goodness, from our love, from our psyches, and from our souls, from each place from which it has been extracted and gathered, from all the places where the flow of what is needed for cycling, spiraling life has been confined, directed, channeled into ways that do not serve thriving life, or love, or light, that do not serve future. All of this decimation of the beauty, harmony, balance, substance, and the sacred movement of life is now here recognized, reconciled, revered, and placed in the healing hands and volition of a deep and holy co-creation, is now released, flowing out and flowing out and flowing out, a dam of life released to the places most critical, to the places most generative, to the places most restorative, to the places most joyful, to the places most creative for the wholeness and integrity of interbeing, to the places most sacred, to the places most affirmative of our true desire and our deepest consent to live unto 7 generations, to live with all our relations on this sacred, thriving, powerful earth, to align with her boundless creativity, ingenuity, and unconditional love in the creation of endless, ever-evolving life. We give our love here. We give our place in fearless generosity here. We give our faith here. We give our place in radical abundance here. We give our consent here. With this opening, we break the bondage that was law over love. We open and prepare ourselves to love the future in ways that the scarcity paradigm would not allow. We give this money, power, and ask it to give us future. With our participation in this gathering, with the sacred gift of our volition, from the place on the sacred hoop of life that we have been given to uphold, we open this field of a new energy to receive the future of the very highest possibility for life, light, and love. May all that this flow encounters be touched and transformed in whatever way is right by this currency of consciousness that has reached out to us and flow into and through the future consciousness that we are growing into. Holy life, holy future, please guide and direct us. Show us the ways. For all my relations.
Gratitude for the words shared, the prayers shared, the ones that are beating in our hearts that may not find their way to words, that are finding their way. So that prayer really speaks to what Alnoor and I felt to do in this 4th webinar, which was to kind of move our emergent session to this one and have these 3 dear friends, allies, I would say elders, not in years, but in wisdom, to speak to what it is we're invoking when we say living transition pathways. And perhaps I can ask Laura to put up a slide that we've spoken to in the first webinar while I just try to locate us in this inquiry. Last time we really spoke to hospicing modernity as a way to show one of the ways that Alnoor and I are speaking to the just transition plus onto shifts. And in there we were kind of invoking our brother Bayo Akomolafe, who says that justice will get us a seat at the table, but will never let us leave the house of modernity. So in that, it was really looking at how do we stand in accordance with life? How do we honor the sacredness of life and work to justice, as well as acknowledge the inner work, the very gaze by which we see the world, the very gaze by which we engage with all our relations, that also needs ontological shifts, and it needs deep inner praxis within us. So today we put up this 5-element mandala that we go through in the book, and we asked these 3 speakers because we feel like there's a way in which their work, their very way of being, their embrace of the inner and the outer work, the spiritual and the political, and the work on ontologies while doing the hard work of what is it to actually work on transition pathways out of systems of exploitation and domination, and ones that are in accordance with life. This is a view that we we have of some of the ways that we can compose with life and work on transition pathways. But I want to again say that it's not just the what we're doing, or even just the how we're doing, but it's this work, for example, in solidarity with Indigenous peoples, that is this inner lived praxis of what is it to actually undo the legacy of the Occidental orientation, or me as someone who incarnated as a white-bodied woman these days, to actually live what is solidarity. What is it to work in right relationship and restore our relations with the more than human world? What is it to be in an alchemical state change that we can actually co-create post-capitalist realities that is not a binary of old culture and new culture, but is a lived world in which we see values of solidarity, altruism, empathy, kinship, et cetera, be the way that we are living in accordance within ourselves, within our relations, within our systems and our cultures. And as Pat was speaking this prayer, it's also how can capital monies be liberated in service of life, and what we will often speak to as post-capitalist, not just the infrastructure of the material world, but all that is in the roots of that to come forth. So this is what we're invoking today, and what our dear friends, allies, colleagues, and teachers are here to share with us. And I'm going to see if my co-pilot, co-author, my brother, wants to add anything to just frame us and land. And if not, I'll introduce Pat, and we'll move into the speakers.
No, just to say that this slide that's up right now is the 5 Elements Mandala, and it's the central framework of the book. And that we're not suggesting this as some kind of neat, tidy framework that is, I don't know, universally applicable, right? It's just a frame for orientation, and it's just a way to think about how we address the new, ancient, emerging cultural contexts that need to be created in the midst of late-stage capitalism, as well as the post-capitalist infrastructure and the peoples that we need to align ourselves with in order to be in right relation at this critical juncture in history. And what's central to the mandala is the central piece, which is the ether, which we call the recultivation of life force, which is creating systems and structures that facilitate healing, and not healing to be well adjusted within a sick society, but to be resilient in the face of full shadow and full light of what we're up against, which is the totalitarian logic of neoliberalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, hierarchy, ongoing coloniality, etc.
Thanks, brother. And maybe with that, we can take down our one set of view of the transition pathways, and I can offer this ritual that we do of introducing people to locate them and recognize that whatever I say can't in any way encapsulate the depth of who the person is who's moving to speak. But I have the profound honor of introducing a dear sister, ally, co-conspirator, and a dear elder, Pat McCabe, Woman Stand Shining, of the Diné Nation, and makes her home in what is now known as New Mexico in the southwest of the United States in Turtle Island. Pat is a radical bridger called to propose that the paradigm for the way of being human is a choice. And she makes that case for a thriving life paradigm in her work as a speaker internationally, as a teacher, as a ceremonialist, calling on the deep indigenous sciences of sustainability, or I love this, the mad love affair with Earth. She is a deep listener of vision and instruction from the larger community of an interrelated life, Earth, and cosmos, and spirit helper. This is a sentence that encapsulates that humble listening. I want to be led now. I understand that it is not about my proposals, plans, and good ideas. These are Woman Stand Shining's words. Her work is around the reconciliation between the masculine and the feminine, between the men's nations and the women's nations, the remembering, the creating, the recreating of a new narrative for the sacred masculine, and addressing the archetypal wounding that occurred in our misunderstanding and abuse of technology in prayer, ceremony, and science. Yeah, it's an honor to have you here with us, Pat. It's been an honor to learn with you and from you as we've been bringing this work forward. So we offer the talking piece over to you.
Thank you so much, Lynn. And again, thank you everybody for showing up for this conversation that's so needed, and we need to have it together, of course. So I wanted to acknowledge that, you know, in my process of the last 4 or 5 years of looking at how can we reimagine money and protect the sacred, many new pieces have been arriving, and that's where this prayer came out. It was actually a prayer to open a kind of experimental fund, not really a fund, but I mean, there was money involved, money was collected, but it was a gathering of trust, I'm going to say, and it was a gathering of unconditional, well, trust and regard, because as these funds were, you know, we moved these funds together as a practice of looking to see what would happen if we collectively just trusted what the needs were that we were running into, where the places were where our collective energy resource could serve to protect the sacred. But really, you know, we had Elder, some of you may know, Orland Bishop was of course instrumental in this process. And, you know, he kept saying, it's not the money. It's not about the money. Yes, there's money here, but really it's about the trust. It's about doing things in a sacred way. And I love how he said this. He said, you know, if we do it, you know, we don't have to do it correctly. We have to do it sacredly. And if we do it sacredly, then what needs to be corrected will be corrected. And so that gave me and others in this process, you know, a way to practice with each other, and really what was coming about in each of us, you know, without having to go through any process of inquiry or why are you doing this? Why do these people? Why should the funds go here or there? But just saying, you know, this is where I feel it should go, and everybody blessing it and finding the way to have prayer and ceremony around it. And so what arose in that process, I'm going to say, is to begin to look at what are our unconscious agreements around money. And that was a really big part of our process as a community, because until, you know, we can look at all the many agreements that have arisen around this human construct of money, it's hard to know what's operating. So much is hidden and under a weird sort of politeness, but really it's not politeness, it's fear. It's fear of not having our needs met, just basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, and this idea that somehow we can fix that security. So that's where that prayer arose from, was to open that process, open that central meeting place that did involve money, but really involved relationship and self-examination. So in that process, you know, as I was saying in that prayer, and I'll say it in a kind of shorter way here, which is that, you know, I realized that, well, one, I want us to notice like how powerful is our power to imagine and to come into agreement that life can now be sequestered in money. This arbitrary human construct. So I just have to notice, like, that's how powerful we can be together. Now, I would have to say that I feel like that's sort of not right use of our power of imagination and collective agreement. But nevertheless, let's look at it. There it is, you know. Meanwhile, this Mother Earth is blasting life in all directions, and every fruit tree is throwing off more fruit than I know what to do with. You know, I have like 30 fruit trees, and when they all go, it's overwhelming, you know. So I say, you know, her economy is radical abundance and fearless generosity all around us. So we're superimposing all these unconscious beliefs upon a very, very different economy. So this life is sequestered. We've somehow managed to sequester life itself into this form. And as that life is being hoarded, things, you know, we're withdrawing the life out of life. And so, of course, things are dying everywhere. So, you know, it helps me to look at it that way, and it helps me to be able to speak about it that way, because I say, you know, now is the time where that life has, that life that has been damned has to be released back into life. And also in that process, I do feel that we are learning how arbitrary that construct is. As Orlin said, it's sort of a focus tool to help guide our attention. But it's our relationship. It's our relationships. If we are living in what Thich Nhat Hanh names as interbeing, if the well-being of every life form affects all of the other life forms, then relationship is everything. Relationship is it. And if relationship is it, then love is it. Because what higher form can there be in relationship? So one thing that I noticed in this process is that, you know, the beliefs that have been instilled in us from very, very young. You know, I say the cardinal rule about having a little money or a lot of money, doesn't matter, is you must not be foolish with it. And so that's such a contraction, and it's working against, you know, this releasing the dam of life back into life, because it makes us not have much willingness to experiment, not have much willingness to take risks. So that's sort of the general lay of the land of where I've been living and noticing. But I want to move into, you know, what can we do about it? One, I feel like one thing that was powerful in this community was it was creating, you know, I say talking about money is as intimate and personal as talking about sex. It's very, very private and personal. That's our rule, right? So to get in there with each other and create that kind of intimacy is something that gives us space to breathe and to be willing to support each other in being courageous about taking risks. It feels risky. even though everything around us is heading towards death, it feels risky to try something different and new. That's how powerful these unconscious beliefs are that have been instilled in us. So to create community for holding transition can be very powerful. And in that community, we can begin to speak about what do we really mean when we talk about profit? So that's been very powerful, is to be able to start to come up with new definitions, even for the existing terms within economy and money. I mean, even that word economy, we think we know what we're saying when we say economy. Do we really know what we're saying? Economy touches everything. It's the interrelated web of life, actually. But as soon as we say economy, our mindset goes into legalities, I don't know, stocks and bonds, and all those kinds of things. But we're talking about our life here. Make no mistake when we use that word. Because we're talking about what every being needs to live their life. And as I said, in our green room before we came on here, one thing that I keep thinking is, nobody has any right to get in between what this Mother Earth would give to her child. Let me say that again. Nobody has any right to get in between that relationship between what the Mother Earth would give to her child. That is so out of bounds. That is violating spiritual law, not to mention the law of good sense of life, right? So I want to, so reimagining money is to reimagine, we get so held by these systems, even when we want to do it differently. There's our old friend, the IRS is right there. It all wants to bind us, but here's what I want to say about it too is, this is a radical statement, I guess, but it's truth. If we really believe with all our hearts that we have to fulfill every single existing legal agreement on the planet, we are going to lose this life. There is not enough earth to cover everything that has been promised in our legal agreements. So where does that leave us? Legal agreements are sacrosanct, we say. So that reality for me says that we begin to I find more and more willingness for risk taking, to, I'll use this as an example, which I know Lynn and Alnoor wanted me to speak about, but I had I come from Diné Nation, which I don't think I even said yet. I'm so impassioned about this subject. People, as my daughter says, incorrectly know us as Navajo. But our young people said to our tribal government, tribal governments were set up to, I don't know, appease the conscience of the United States government, so that they could feel like they had someone to legitimately negotiate with, even though they were the ones setting up the people who were involved in these governments to make sure they had someone that would negotiate the way that they hoped. That's the origin of these tribal governments. Some of them have changed, some of them have not. But our young people said to our tribal government, hey, we can't look to you as leaders or eldership even at this point, because you are selling us out to extraction. Therefore, we will go to the original elders. We will go to the original teachers, the ones who gave us the instructions for how we might go about being a human being on this earth in a way that is omnibeneficent. And so they walked hundreds of miles to the mountain. And in that process, they opened something. So they ended up walking to our easternmost of our sacred mountains, and the owners there were landowners there, and saw these young people walking and making a prayer. They were just making it on the street corner because they had nowhere to go, because all of that land at the base of one of our 4 sacred mountains was all privately owned. And so when the owners saw them kneeling down on the street corner trying to make a prayer, they said, hey, we understand that you're obviously Diné, and we invite you to come and make your prayer on this land that we have. That's what we've always wanted to do. We've always wanted to give Diné people access. So that sets something in motion. That's not a logical plan. You understand? That's the impulse out of the heart and the soul, reaching towards life, that opened this pathway. So fast forward to now, you know, the owners decided they were going to sell. They said, wouldn't it be great if Diné people could own this land, but they weren't in a position to give it away for their own lives. And so we called upon this community of reimaginers. And we worked together, and I said, look, this mountain is calling for something. One, our people will have ceremonial access, which we do not have. And if we can continue our ceremonies and deepen our ceremonies on this mountain, I believe that's going to serve all life. We have to remember, and we have to be re-empowered. Because as I say, if sustainability is the highest and most sought after technology on the planet, who should we be talking to? We should be talking to those peoples who've known how to live in one place over an extended period of time, 1,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years, 20,000 years, in relative health, harmony, and happiness, in this mad love affair with this Mother Earth. So this is part of what this will serve. But the mountain herself, I'll say, Sisnajini, one of the original teachers and elders of Five-Fingered Ones, said, remind the human beings that the human beings have always collaborated and cooperated with mountains wherever we have been. The mountains draw that energy up from earth and focus it. It gets sent out to cosmos. Cosmos responds through the sun back down to this Mother Earth. So this is part of the conversations that mountains hold for us. And this mountain is asking that we remember that human beings have played a role in that conversation everywhere on this Mother Earth. This particular mountain is calling for that again. So yes, there are peoples who have very deep, long-running, very elaborate relationships known as ceremony with these mountains. But this mountain is also saying, even if you, with consciousness, with your heart, with your soul, approach the mountain as we do, with awe, with exhilaration, that this is a part of our contribution of contributing to this long conversation that has been going on between earth and mountain. So this is why I say I'm not looking to think this through anymore. We don't know. In my opinion, we don't know. I'm looking to deepen my capacity to listen for that voice. Now, I don't know what this mountain is going to do, but there's a call, and I've been asked to bring it out to the world that way. The way that we went about the purchase of the land, we said, you know, I told people, let's do this in a way that has never been done before, because we have the power of this mountain behind us now. And so let's open up these para boxes let's open up these boxes that want to hold us in, you know. And I worked with a team that had the legalities, you know, understood well, and they just kept saying to me, you tell us what the vision is, Woman Stand Shining. You tell us what the vision is and let us form all of these systems around the vision. Don't try to make the vision fit into the boxes of the laws and the taxes and all of that. So I feel really, really blessed to have people working with me that feel that way. So I'm going to wrap up my part of the time here. So we have a very convoluted purchasing model. I don't know if I can call it a model, but setup. Because what we had working for us that we don't normally have is between the previous owners, the people gifting funds, myself. We had trust. We had an inordinate amount of trust. Therefore, we could manipulate all of the systems in such a way to make it work out. So that's the other thing, and strategy-wise, is to ask what is the medicine that we have here, thinking the way that we're thinking, knowing that these legal structures cannot lead us to life at this point. So I'll end by saying, you know, I'm starting this people's campaign, and it's a campaign asking for 1 billion people on the planet to acknowledge, to just say, I believe it's possible as a human being for me to be able to cooperate and collaborate with mountains the way that our ancestors always have. And in this case, I'm asking for that, for the initial impulse, because it was called for from this mountain, to acknowledge this Najini. And say, yes, I hear you, and I acknowledge that. There are other financial needs that will need to be met. So I was saying, we had some people contribute large sums of money, but I'm saying if I also want to move into that power that we have as in our numbers. So if we have one person giving $1 million, I want to see 1 million people give $1 to keep moving this vision forward, to keep moving this place that's asking for it. And then I ask people to turn to their own mountains. So we'll put in my website here, and there'll be more information about that. So it's a little bit cryptic, but I can give more information another time, but I'm going to open it up to the next speaker and say thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Alnoor, for this beautiful work and making a space for us to be able to speak these things out and pray together, consider, be in right relations. So, thank you.
Thank you, Pat. No, I'm not cryptic at all. I think linearity is overrated. You once said to me when we first met, it's our best thinking that got us here. I don't know if you remember that. But yeah, thank you for trusting your intuition and your guidance and your ancestral whispers and your vision. Yeah. Thank you for your prayer. And when we send the follow-up email, if you're comfortable, we can send the third rower prayer that you read and links to your work and ways to support.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
And so maybe we'll just all take a breath together if we can. I invite you to, if you feel comfortable, just to have a little transition. Really honoring what Sister Pat has brought into the circle. And honoring your lived example of post-capitalism. And often people think post-capitalism means no capital or anti-capitalist. And part of what we're arguing is let's use capital in the short period of time it's worth something to build the post-capitalist infrastructure: food, land, water, energy, medicine, cultural, educational sovereignty at a bioregional level, stewarded by people who understand and have intimacy with that live geography the best. Thank you, Pat. We're going to bring up our sister Marai. Love you, Pat. So our next guest is Professor Marai Larasi, who I consider an elder, a sibling, a radical. She's a Black African Caribbean British feminist, community organizer, advocate, educator, social justice activist. And she works across a number of spheres. She's not above getting entangled in the NGO development industrial complex and attempting to take it down in all the ways she does with love and fierce grace. And she sits on numerous boards. We met her through her work at Lankali Chase and the Baobab Foundation. And she's also part of Project Talawa, which she's going to talk about today, which is a Black feminist collective. It's just in its nascent emerging phase, so this is a perfect time to hear from her. And yeah, it's an honor to have you with us, Marai. Thank you for your time and wisdom and beingness.
Thank you, bro. Thank you. Well,
and Laura, you can take us off. We'll just focus on Marai. Thank you.
So, I'm just kind of I'm still almost rocking from Pat's sharing. So thank you, sister. Like, as you were speaking, I could hear my heart, my belly, my body were like really like singing with resonance. So I just want to thank you. Alnoor, Lynn, thank you for this space, and thank you to everyone for being in community with us today. Before I can speak about money, I feel to locate myself in the interest of my own landing, and also rooting in the space. So I'm a child who has emerged from the devastation of colonization, probably with the determination to not be endlessly devastated, while always bearing that mark, the scars, the traumas, the inscriptions of colonization on, in, and through my body. And there's an amnesia that comes with that for, as a result of that trauma. And I started describing it like a never-ending psychic lobotomy. It's like Chiron's wound refuses to be healed. And so I've necessarily become an alchemist, a seamstress, stitching together pieces of fragments of memory and also a time traveler. I was born here on the islands of the disunited kingdom, what some of us fondly call People's Republic of London. My parents are Jamaican, so I was raised in the mountains of Jamaica, colonially known as Jamaica, where the soil is a deep, rich red. And like blood, it gives life and it stains. I'm a product of colonization. I really am. Like sugar, like rum, like modern tobacco. And I carry that legacy in my psyche. It's one of trafficking, enslavement, exploitation, hybridity, pain, survival, resistance, and more. Because my ancestors are those unknown women, men, and children that were ripped from the belly of Africa and forced through a gate of no return into the belly of a ship and made to labor in European-owned plantations built on the lands of indigenous Taino people who were almost wiped out by the Spanish invaders. The complexities that my ancestors are also those very Europeans who were the architects of this devastation. So in that spirit, I invoke the presence of only those ancestors who journey with us with love and care across time and space, and who hold us hold us in our day-to-day lives and in our dreams and our struggles of collective liberation. I want to offer deep gratitude to the band of troublemakers, some who are here, all of you probably. Troublemakers, disruptors, warriors, my Black feminist community, my Black liberation community, my people. We're an untidy bunch. We're the dykes holding the lines, the disabled rebels who refused to be erased, the queers who refused to be straightened, were the ones that would have been called ignoble savages, the revolting natives. And it's in this space that Project Halawa has emerged. And what I'm going to talk to you about is grief work, it's joy work, it's legacy work. It's like Pat spoke about, reimagined future work. Or grounding in Project Halawa is that we're rooted in ancestral memory and in the dream of our collective liberation. We're an emerging Black feminist resourcing and community initiative. That's the tidy bit of saying it. We're led by and for Black / global majority women. There are more people of color on the planet than there are white folk. And but we're the, we become named as minorities. And so we have a rejection of that narrative. We talk about minoritization as a deliberate and intentional process. And we started emerging in 2019. And we started, and I want to honor the space of that emergence as one of pain and disappointment, as well as hope. And as Mariam Kaba says, hope is a discipline, right? So I want to honor that. Actually, although there's a group of us who came together to do the work of Project Halawa, we came together rooted in legacies of pain, of heartache, of worry, but also like of radical Black feminist imagination that took us to a place of what could we possibly dream? What's the world that we're dreaming, and how do we begin to practice that now? The pathways for us were very much about being in deep relationship with each other, really kind of figuring out how we wanted to be. We started out with space that was, and we continue to operate in a way that each conversation is held. Each conversation is, for want of a better way of putting it, facilitated. Because one of the things that we knew is that we were all and we continue to be people recovering from the NGO space. Like we're those people that are like, actually, I'm done. This space has been harmful, all of that stuff. So there's grief, there's rage, there's love, there's addiction to the space. There's all of that stuff that we came together as a group of humans recovering from that. And we knew that if we didn't do that work intentionally to create community, that we would fall into the very same traps that we had witnessed, that we'd experienced. We knew that we would play the harm out on each other's bodies the way that we probably have done in the past, and that we've been harmed. And so building trust and building relationship was the foundation of all of that work. And in many ways, like the way that we have come through with Project Halawa has traveled into other spaces. It's traveled into the work in Lankelly Chase. It's traveled into like my work with Baobab. It's traveled into loads of spaces, because despite the fact that I and others had this understanding that relationships matter, in many ways we had gotten so used to not being in the practice of prioritizing relationships. We'd gotten so used to being in the practice of get the form done, get the money out the door, do the thing, this is urgent. Like, like, why are you sitting down having a long conversation? Like, we spend too much time talking. In Project Halawa, we talk and we listen and we spend time. And one of the first things that we did was we threw out urgency. So like, we're really clear, like, shit is urgent. Mama Earth will throw us off at some point if we don't heal our relationship with her. That's urgent. But like that, like capitalist urgency, like get the form done. No. We were like, I hope people don't mind. I swear a lot. I'm gonna try not to swear. It's gonna come out. But we were like, F that, like, no. So we rejected that. We also really started out, and Pat, I just want to say, I love you. We started out with linguistic resistance as part of how we do our thing, right? We were like, there's a Rasta saying, which is word, sound, have power. So we're like, what we speak, what we express is how we be. And so we're constantly saying, like, if we're stuck with a word, we'll be like colonially known as, like, if there's a word that we can't reframe, right? And so we were like, no, we don't want people to, no, dude, you're not a donor. Like, you are not a donor. If you show up with reparative strategy and you show up in solidarity. Please do not show up like you are not, we're not interested in benevolence, right? And it was also really interesting to be in a space where we emerged really quietly. And the folk that have known about us, which is why, like, sometimes people are like getting what I'm doing confused with the other spaces that are a bit louder, like a bit more shouty. And it's because we were like, we don't want a social media presence. Like, we're just like out here, like this little fractal, trying this thing. I should also say that Talawa is a word that emerged in Jamaica, in Jamaica. And it comes from this idea, it's usually directed at little girls who have a fighting spirit. So the expression is that you little but your talawa, and basically what it is you've got attitude, you're mighty, all of those things. And we were like, we're much more interested in how we can do our work carefully and gently, be mighty in how we be with each other, than creating a big bang, like in that way. We're much more interested in practicing at this level, even if it's 4 of us or 6 of us, and actually having that move out in that way, as opposed to creating this big thing that we knew would fail for us, because that's what we've witnessed and experienced before. Okay, so practically, just a few things. We haven't registered as a charity or as a 501 is what you have in Turtle Island. Oh, well, you know, that's what the US government imposes on people. Again, Pat, thank you for talking about the laws. We don't talk about that enough. We haven't done that, and we're like, you know what? That means we don't get the tax break. Hey, and so what? Like, we won't get the tax break. And because we're also dealing with a situation where the regulatory bodies also are operating with such surveillance of what we are doing. And we dealt with that like really quickly. We will not register as a charity. We're fiscally hosted at the moment. It's not always kind of a straightforward dynamic. We are registering as a community benefit society, which is the closest legal framework that we have that can work for us, which again means we don't take the tax break. We started moving money to community last year. We speak about our constellations. We don't call people grantees. We don't call people grantee partners. As far as we're concerned, we're sharing the same galaxy, we're in the same universe. So we're in movement together. We position ourselves in movement building. We do not position ourselves as a funder, as a donor, as a if it's philanthropy, it's in its purest form, in that we are in friendship, right? We're in community. So we position ourselves that way. We're unapologetic about who we move money to, and we also don't have an open grants process, whatever that thing is, because we've also witnessed and experienced that, and we're like, okay, that works for whatever the thing is, but we know that that would be hypocritical of us, because we also know that that doesn't fit the model that we're trying to establish. I just want to speak to a piece in the book, which is the piece around surrendering control, traversing the threshold, and re-entering the continuum. And I want to say that when I read that, I cried, because I feel like that's what, for us in Project Halawa, has been so important. It literally is vertigo. Like, we really don't know where we will end up. Like, for us, the deepest thing has been to let go of all the control and of all the systems that we know. And it's a constant process. It's like decolonization. You peel a layer off, and then you find out how shitty you are and how invested you are in the system. And then you have to go a little bit deeper, and you have to go a little bit deeper. And I would say for us, that has been the most powerful gift, being in community with 5, 6, 7 sisters, highly melanated, who are like, actually, let's let go of control. And what it feels like when you don't have the walls, the familiar oppressive is what I name it. What it feels like is it can feel terrifying. It is also, there is a vertigo that comes with that is also excruciatingly beautiful, because what it means is we're in this space of learning, of evolution, of unlearning, of unknowing, a space of discovery, not in the Columbus sense, right? But a space of like, what are we learning? What are we finding out that is new? What are we remembering from our ancestors? And what are we building? I'm going to stop there because I know that we're going to have like other conversations, and I feel like that's that natural place of pausing for me. I'm just going to let go.
Thank you so much, Marai, for the embodiment of who you are as you are transmitting that. And I also want to say a thank you to you. When we were sitting in circle last year, you brought a very gentle and very powerful linguistics mimetic structure for me, which was shifting from speaking to the global north or global south to the geopolitical north and the geopolitical south. And I think for all who are listening, you can understand and tune into what that reframe actually does in the mimetic structure and this landscape that often is carried within our bodies and carried within our unconscious structures of how we refer to and divide up the world. And thank you for speaking to that in terms of the global majority as well, and recasting that gaze that we often look at minorities and recognizing the power over paradigm in both of those ways that we see. Yeah, thank you. Now, before we turn to our third speaker, I just want to see if my brother has any piece there to thread before we move.
No, just expressing gratitude to Marai for her beingness. And lovely Marai, thank you for doing the work you're doing and walking in the world the way you do.
Yeah. And as we turn to introduce our third speaker today, I kept feeling someone who was part of our accompaniment circle and who's now an ancestor who also worked with Ashish. And I would say this is Gustavo Esteva that I'm referencing. And I was feeling Gustavo because our speakers are really showing what it is to walk in what Alnoor and I have talked about are these post-capitalist values and not set up old culture, new culture that we're getting out of something. And Gustavo dedicated his life to what I would say like post-capitalist realities. And he reminded Alnoor and I that there have been peoples all over this planet who've been living post-capitalist realities for hundreds and hundreds of years. And that there's many peoples who are living those ways while still in the systems of capitalism. And this is what Alnoor was speaking about, the potency of liberating capital in these moments, using capital to build the post-capitalist infrastructure, and that there are those. And so our third speaker, we felt to go to the world's majority, has joined us today, just getting off a plane from traveling from South Africa back to his home in India, going through Bombay traffic to be with us. And it's very late in the evening there. And so I want to thank you very deeply, Ashish, for being here with us today, for all the work that you do. And I'm going to attempt to offer a few words by way of a biographical introduction that won't do justice to all the work that Ashish has been tending with who's now an ancestor, Gustavo, and many others who for decades have been tending the acupressure points across among the world's majority in what we Alnoor and I are calling and invoking of these post-capitalist realities. So, yeah. So Ashish Kothari is a founding member of, and I'm going to probably say this wrong, because the dyslexic in me gets nervous when I have to say words I can't say.
It's Kalpavriksh, Lynn.
Thank you. And is a member of many people's movements. Ashish has taught in the Indian Institute of Public Administration. He's coordinated India's National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan. He's served on the boards of Greenpeace International and India, the ICCA Consortium. He's been a judge on the International Tribunal of the Rights of Nature. He helps coordinate the Kalp Sangam, also the Global Tapestries of Alternatives, and the Radical Ecological Democracy. We'll put links to all of these, the various bodies of work that our speakers have shared. Ashish is also the co-author and co-editor of a beautiful book called Churning the Earth, Alternative Futures and the Pluriverse, a post-development dictionary. So we are really grateful and honored to have you with us. Thanks for jumping in right after getting off of a plane, and we offer the last space for you to share from your wisdom.
Thank you so much, Lynn and Alnoor, for this opportunity. Thanks for remembering Gustavo. It's been almost exactly 1 year since he left us in his physical embodiment, but his spiritual and intellectual embodiment, of course, stays with us. Namaste, everybody. Zindabad. It's very tough going after Pat and Marai because they're just so incredibly articulate. But I'm also grateful to them for laying a really wonderful foundation for this conversation. I'm not nearly as articulate as them, so I will fall back on slides to be able to, as a prop for my presentation. As you just mentioned, I just came back from South Africa, and it was very humbling to actually see some of the original art form of the San people of the Kalahari amongst the earliest peoples on the planet, and also to visit areas where I had the humbling experience of looking at a baby rhino as it was looking at me with curiosity. In fact, it came very close, trying to figure out what this strange creature with spectacles is. And it's just, these are always moments which remind us in a very deep, deep way of the kind of connections we have with the rest of the earth and with other human beings and other species. So it's been wonderful to have been there, and then of course come back to India, which is another very ancient cradle of life. So based on some of what I've been doing over the last 40-45 years, I want to speak about what I think are some of the sort of pathways out of the multiple global crises we're in. I'm not going to speak about the crises. This depressing stuff is all around us. We're all familiar with all the collapses that are taking place, which are affecting billions of people and of course the rest of life on Earth. We've also seen what development has meant for most of us, especially those of us in the global South on whom it has been imposed as a form of violence, and the conversion of livelihoods, which were farming, pastoral, fishing, crafts based livelihoods and occupations and lives, which were really in that sense livelihoods. They were not jobs, into what we now have in the modern sector, and the destruction of these livelihoods into what I call deadlihoods, and we're moving more and more towards that. And so I think one of the questions we're all faced with really is, are there alternatives? Are we kind of condemned to go in the same unilinear direction that the Western modernity has taught us, or are there really alternatives to this, which are fundamentally respectful of all life? And I would say that this is really a crucial search for us, because the same system that has created the problems, that is engendering further and further collapses and conflict and inequality and so on, is giving us what it calls solutions. And unless we actually really fundamentally look at those so-called solutions, which includes everything that's coming to us in the climate debate, climate dialogue, negotiations or the biodiversity negotiations, etc., unless we really fundamentally question them, we're not going to be able to move out of these crises, because we have to be able to point to what I think Alnoor also originally talked about, the sort of structural and relational forces that have created the problems in the first place. And in that sense, I think one of the pathways out is resistance itself. I think it was Pat who actually told us, when some of us interviewed her in Tamera 3-4 years back, the term beautiful, sacred resistance. There's a Palestinian activist who calls it beautiful resistance. This particular image is from about 30 years back of indigenous people in central India protesting against 2 mega hydroelectricity projects that would have displaced 300 villages and destroyed this riverine ecosystem and the forests. And in their argument, they were not just talking about how they don't want their villages to be drowned and them to be displaced, but also that for them, for the government, the river was mega hydroelectricity, it was megawatts and power, etc. For them, the river was our mother. And we are not going to allow our mother to be shackled by your dreams of progress. This is the articulation that was given. And we see this kind of articulation. We've seen it, of course, with what the Pat and others have been doing against pipelines in North America and many other places around the world, of where people are actually saying there are other ways of dreaming, of being, of behaving, of knowing than what Western modernity is actually telling us. The second kind of alternatives that we're seeing around the world are where people are actually meeting human needs and aspirations without trashing the earth and without causing the kind of inequalities and discriminations that the modern industrial neoliberal system is giving us. I'm going to give just 3 or 4 examples quickly, because I think it's really nice to be able to ground what we're seeing and doing and talking about in stories. I mean, I love stories, and some of these are really powerful stories to continue to inspire us. This is 5,000 Dalit women farmers. Dalits are the so-called untouchables of Indian society, the most marginalized section of Indian society, who have over the last 30 years brought back their traditional cropping patterns and agriculture, very deeply rooted in the earth, in the spirituality of the earth and of seeds, completely organic, all totally their own knowledge, their own seeds, everything, and moving away from situations of hunger and malnutrition and deprivation to one of not just food security for 5,000 families, but food sovereignty, complete control over everything to do with food, taking it away from corporations and from the government, and through that actually also transforming their lives as women and as the so-called outcasts. Across the other end of the world, the Quechua indigenous communities in the Andean highlands of Peru are doing something similar, conserving what they consider a biocultural spiritual landscape with their own governance mechanisms and protecting the biological diversity, again, with not just the material, but also the cultural, the spiritual connections that they have with the landscape and with everything in it. This is another extremely inspiring example for me, because this happens to be in what is one of the one of the longest war-torn regions of the world, the sort of quadri-junction between the nation states of Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria, where the Kurdish people have been trying to create a large region of relative peace based on what they call genealogy, which is a sort of an eco-feminist ideology, and the principles of Jin, Jian, Azadi, women, life, and freedom, and doing some incredible work at actually establishing local decision-making, voice for all the peoples, men and women, and also trying to move towards ecologically much more sustainable forms of production. Back here in India, in central India, indigenous people have been struggling also for self-governance and self-determination against a destructive mining project, but also beginning to question their own internal injustices. The women actually asking, as we fight against the nation state imposing its views on us, as women, we have never been part of the decision making in the village. Why should that be the case? So we need to also struggle for our own internal equality and justice, and to bring back our cultural identity based on our relationship with the earth and with forests. In cities too, we see these kinds of struggles going on, where people are saying, why should the city be planned and budgeted by bureaucrats and politicians? Why not all of us, those of us who are living in urban neighborhoods? We should be at the core, at the center of decision making. This is an example from Western India, where many of the residents' associations there have actually moved to assert their centrality in decision making, but also their local self-reliance for things like water, energy, waste management, and especially for those who are the poorest, the most marginalized in the city. In fact, even in the midst of the most capitalist societies of the world, we find post-capitalist or non-capitalist forms of solidarity and social economy. I don't have the time to go into all of these, but for instance, the one on the bottom right-hand side in Greece is a factory run by the workers completely democratically. There is no boss, and each worker gets exactly the same wage as every other worker for every hour of work, regardless of whatever work is being done. There's examples of time banking, of alternative currencies, of social centers where, again, the most marginalized peoples are the ones who are expressing their agency and are also able to be co-beneficiaries in whatever economic activities are being run. We also see examples of alternative learning across the world, because the schooling system has become so much part of actually creating clones for fitting into the currently dominant system, capitalist system or the state system. So these are spaces of learning which are rebelling against that, which are saying that learning should be about being culturally and ecologically rooted, even as we learn from other cultures and other ecologies, and where it's not just about training the head, but also the hands, the heart, the feet, and the soul. It's a composite. Gandhiji called it the Nai Talim way of learning, right? So, and in all of this, one of the most interesting things for me is actually looking at original words of meanings. And in this work, then I found that the word school comes from the Greek word skole, which meant leisure. 95% of India's schools are anything but leisure. They're mostly prisons. So we've also looked at, in fact, in the last 3 years, many examples of where communities were able to thrive or survive much better than others. Here in India, things collapsed because of the economic lockdown, as also the health epidemic. But there were many communities, and we have about 70 cases of these, which were able to do much better, which were coping much better because they had their community systems intact or revived them. They had collective access to and custodianship over the resources that were important for livelihoods. They had local self-reliance in food and so on. And these are extremely important examples. Also, we have more than 25 from across the world of these, of where you could see that in the midst of crises, because of this phenomenon of the collective, it was much easier for them to cope than many other parts of the world. So I'm going to put these sorts of examples together into what we here call a sort of a framework that is emerging of radical transformation, which we call the flower of transformation, which, in a sort of artificial way, we've kind of looked at it in 5 spheres of life: the political, the economic, the social, the cultural, and the ecological. And of course, all of these very greatly interconnected and intermeshed. Not going to go into all of these, but essentially what people are arguing is that we need to take back control over decision making, whether it is decision making in the political sphere. So democracy is about us being the government or governing rather than handing it over to politicians and bureaucrats. About economic democracy, us being in control over the means of production, being custodians of nature and natural resources, and bringing back the economy of caring and sharing, not money, as also Pat and Marai so eloquently spoke about. Of also dealing with inequalities, some of them traditional from the past, like patriarchy, some of them new in the new class systems. Bringing back a diversity of culture and knowledge in the commons, not the privatization, not intellectual property rights, but actually having whatever we're writing or speaking or songs or art or whatever it is being available in the commons. And of course, all of this based on reintegrating ourselves within nature, not the biological pyramid that many of us, I learned this when I was in school, that we are human beings are at the top of some sort of pyramid. And you note that in this figure is the man on top and the woman below, and all other species, but rather a circle of life, which is what, in fact, indigenous visions have always been. So how do we, those of us who moved out of that, unlike, Pat and Marai, who's still very much located within that, those of us who moved out of it, how do we reintegrate ourselves within nature in this circle of life kind of way of looking at things? And that's where I think the core of the flower of transformation is really, really important. Many people ask me, okay, you have these wonderful examples. How do we replicate them, or how do we upscale them? And my response has always been that neither replication nor upscaling is the right way of doing it. What we need to do is to say, what are the ethics, the values that are being expressed in these amazing examples? Can we learn from those and then bring them back to wherever we are in our own context, our ecological, political, economic context, and see what kind of transformations we can make, sustaining what we already have or creating new ones where that's been lost? And so this is a sort of set of values that I've learned from many of these initiatives and examples. None of these is something that I've cooked up. And of course, they're expressed in very, very, very different ways in different parts of the earth. But to my mind, it's this set of ethics and more, which is really what we need to confront the currently dominant system with. Not just the practical examples of what is, of course, that is important, but also these sorts of, what could be called worldviews that celebrate life, not that celebrate money and power and fame, but which celebrate life. And we have many of them. So here in India, actually, what's being revived is a notion called Swaraj, which means self-rule. Very bad translation, but self-rule, but it actually means that I or my community will assert our freedom and our autonomy and our self-determination. But the way we do it will not undermine anybody else's autonomy, freedom, self-determination, and well-being. So it's not the American way of looking at freedom, where you can run your SUV wherever you want and bomb a country if it doesn't give you cheap petrol. But it's really saying, yes, my freedom is important for me, but not if if my consumption patterns, for instance, are going to cause, are going to undermine well-being for somebody else. We've extended that more recently to call it eco-Swaraj, which means then not just undermining other people, but also other species. And so how do we meet our basic needs and aspirations? That's important, because for a lot of the world, even that is not happening yet, but in a way that actually sustains other people and the rest of life. And of course, we know that there are similar cosmovisions, worldviews all across the world, many very ancient ones, from indigenous peoples all over the world, which are coming back in struggles and anti-extractivism struggles, etc. Many which are reinterpretations of major religions, which unfortunately have also mostly become very dogmatic and hierarchical. So the reinterpretation of those religions in terms of what is really radical, progressive, fundamental spirituality and spiritual values. And then also ideologies or approaches emerging from within the belly of the beast, within the capitalist societies, such as things like degrowth and ecofeminism, etc., where the attempt is to not just colonize the global south, but to actually decolonize the global north also, because it is also the north which is colonized in its own minds, right? And that's where I think it's really important that we kind of connect more and more and more with each other, because scale cannot be achieved by just becoming bigger and bigger and bigger as a single example. I mean, that's really, maybe that's been also the sort of philanthropic approach, has been the NGO approach, has been the government approach. We got to move away from that and say, okay, how do millions of smaller examples connect with each other to actually create that scale? Or it's what I call outscaling, where we do collective visioning, where we learn from each other, we collaborate, we constructively critique each other and challenge each other to become more and more holistic in our transformations. And therefore also then to move away from, again, solutions that are coming, which are trying to move away from the currently conventional economics, but still somewhat located within the framework, which are the so-called Green New Deals, and towards what I would call rainbow revolutions or rainbow New Deals, which bring all of these things together. The social, the cultural, the political, the economic, the ecological, and of course, fundamentally the ethical and spiritual. To enable this to happen, one of the networks we have in India is called Vikalp Sangam, or the Confluence of Alternatives, not conference, where we, for the last 8 years now, we've been bringing people together around the country, working on different aspects, issues to, to learn from each other, collectively vision, to create stories. We have a website which has now 2,000 stories of this kind of positive transformation taking place. And then emerging from this also now, since 2019, this global platform where networks of these kinds are kind of trying to come together also for collaboration and creating more of a critical mass for the macro changes that we also need. Try to produce material on this. Pluriverse is on that Lynn you mentioned, which has 100 examples of this kind of radical transformations around the world. It's now available in 5-6 languages. And the book on the left is an interesting exercise we did a few years back, asking people from all over India to envision an ideal India in 2100 on multiple fronts, right? Sexuality and gender, conservation, education, health, indigenous peoples, etc. And then to come back to the present and say, okay, how do we get there? What are the pathways of getting to that kind of ideal situation? So these are, these are trying to kind of have our feet firmly rooted on the ground, but also dream and also sort of think big, even as we act in our own local situations. So with that, there's a lot more available on the websites. I will put them in the chat. Thanks again for this opportunity. Wonderful to be with you all. And I'm very happy to be able to continue this discussion and dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish. Thank you for continuing the marathon in the spirit of post-capitalism, from the cradle of humanity to Bombay traffic to the Zoomiverse with 100 strangers. You're a good chaos yogi. And thank you to Marai and Pat, and maybe we'll bring all the speakers forth and have the 5 of us on. And I'm gonna invoke moderator's privileges, let's say, and maybe ask the first question. And I know we have about a half an hour left, so maybe Lynn and I will only ask a question or two. I saw that Firoz is on in the webinar, and so maybe I'll see if Firoz wants to ask a question, and I'll introduce him if he does. But I wanted to just maybe start with a little bit of weaving and invoke that last session we had Vanessa Andreotti with us, and she gave us a definition of coloniality from Chief Niniwa of the Huniquin people from Accra in Brazil. And his definition of colonialism was a biological, neurological, cultural, evolutionary impairment that makes you believe you are separate from the tribe of the living, other humans, other beings, the tribe of the dead, the ancestors, and the living world itself. So it's a cognitive impairment that makes you believe you are separate. And when you understand colonialism in this way, as a disorder of sorts, interesting possibility starts to open. And then the question starts to come of like, well, how do we decolonize ourselves, deschool ourselves? And then I thought of Gustavo, our elder brother and now ancestor. And one of his lines is that we do not need alternative education. We need alternatives to education. The very idea that we need to be educated as opposed to initiated into ways of knowing, being, sensing, and relating to the world is part of the colonial construct. And so to just bring these two together to say, as you're doing this work, as you're building transition pathways, what can allies do? What can those working with you do? What can those in the broader field do to decolonize, deschool, de-learn the Occidental impairment of separation, of hierarchy, of ownership, of private property, of entitlement, of control, of all the mimetic thought forms that have taken real estate in our body through conditioning and entrainment, socialization, what have you. So we can go in any order, whoever feels called, and then I think Lynn will have one more question for you before we open up.
I can say something to that. Thank you. Yeah, so part of what's supposed to take place at the mountain is something, a vision that was given to me about 10 years ago called Joy House, the School for Unlearning. So I'm really listening to this question here. Is it a school? I mean, I feel like those terms are still trying to appease systems and et cetera, you know, and so, you know, as I thought about what would my charitable purpose be if I was going to go 501c3, well, then I'm really thinking, do I really have to do that? My charitable purpose was unlearning the death way and relearning the life way. But I think my short answer to the question that you have is, you know, as I mentioned about Orland's saying, you know, if we do it sacredly, what needs to be corrected will be corrected. And so my call is for moving as we began this meeting, in prayer, with sacred offering of the smoke, like sacralize everything, like bring it into ceremony with each other. And so I'm always making space for the larger community, all the rest of the life, all the ancestors, all that lineage, the cosmos, our allies in the cosmos, and spirit and the spirit helpers. You know, I always want to give them a way into our good ideas of thinking, and keep asking, what else could I be thinking other than what I always think? What else could I be feeling other than what I always feel? What else could I be doing? What else could I be saying other than what I always do and say? So just keep inviting that input. Show me the spectrum of possibilities here. Show me the truth. Show me what real love is. Yeah.
I think it's Marai.
Should
Unless you want to go, Ashish.
Marai, please.
Ashish, I'm good with you.
Sorry.
Go. You go. We could be here for a while. You go. You go.
Yeah. No, thanks. Okay, I'll do that. So yeah, I mean, completely resonate with what Pat just said. I think there's you know, well, one thing that's pretty obvious and everybody's talking about it, but still not enough, nearly enough is happening, is to acknowledge the history and the continuing context of colonization, coloniality, right? Including what you just said, Alnoor, because we have so many different forms of colonialism, many of them still continuing, whether it's in terms of language or relations with regard to how natural resources are extracted and exploited, including in the name of environment, you know, electric vehicles, etc., etc. So that's one thing, but that's kind of more obvious. But I think the less obvious one is about how to decolonize for the global north, especially where most of the so-called donors are based, how to decolonize one's own society, right? And this is in terms of not just consumption patterns, etc., of the rich, but also in terms of, and I think this relates to what you said, in terms of what we even think fundamentally as what is progress, what is development. So you mentioned alternatives to education, but actually it's alternatives to development, not alternative development, sustainable development, but alternative development, which means then you actually fundamentally question also, what is it to be human, or what is it to be a well-being, you know, human with well-being, what is dignity, etc. And when you do that, you actually start realizing that even the so-called comfortable West, you know, Scandinavia with its supposed very high levels of happiness, etc., has a long way to actually go to decolonize itself. And I think the more it does that, the more it's actually going to make space for and enable the agency of the global South to be able to also express itself. I think it was Ivan Illich who long back gave a lecture to an American university. He was invited by them because these university students were going to go to Latin America to help the native populations in whatever they need. And he went and told them in typical Ivan Illich language. He said, if you're going to help them, don't go, just stay here. If you're going as equals to understand them, to learn from them, and also tell them what you know, then yes, you're most welcome. And I think that is the spirit of a decolonized collaboration that the global South and North needs to move towards. Thank you.
So I'm struggling a little bit with this, partly because my disability justice heart is kind of beating strongly in me, and the language of impairment always kind of sends me to a place of what does that mean? Like how, you know, like again, it's the trick of language, right? Like colonial language ties us in knots, and the colonial language is in and of itself, like the interpretation in and of itself can be so troubling. So yeah, I want to think about it less of impairment and more of choice and like addiction and so forth. You know, like we're hooked into coloniality, like and I think about like even the notion of the South and the North and the geopolitical South and North, like I think about who's located where, and I think about how many of us who were rooted in the South and who emerged from the South are located in the North. And I think about somewhere like Turtle Island, which is technically designed as a North, you know, and, you know, like is occupied land. And so like it feels messy for me on so many levels. So I think there is a thing around on the unrooting, like, are we willing to unroot ourselves from the colonial mindset and deal with the unsettling that gives us? And are we then willing to reroute, not just reroute as in plant, but reroute as in direction? I have a little quote I'm just going to share, if I may. So not to unlearn, but to unknow as intentional and deliberate practice. For me, to unknow is connected to, but distinct from unlearning. To unknow is a conscious, sometimes even painful process of unrooting from, severing oneself from knowledge, which may even be precious. This action may even call on us to grieve the sense of displacement, as to unknow may interrupt how we know ourselves. To unknow then opens space for us to engage in the unlearning, which can be harder if we haven't replaced the thing that has become unknown with new, comforting, stable knowledge. And so for me, the like decolonizing also means to like literally be willing to unknow ourselves and know that it is grief work. It is painful work sometimes to basically go, I don't freaking know myself anymore. Who the hell am I if I decolonize myself? Like even those of us who are deeply impacted by colonization, as in we are the ones that have been colonized. Yeah, it's grief work. It's grief work and it's necessary. The other piece is, can we just deal with the reparative work as well as decolonial practice? Like just some shit needs to be paid back. Like if Europe spends the next 500 years paying back, it will never have paid enough. And that's where the whole kind of North and the allyship and the solidarity comes in. Like that's the work.
Thank you. I almost feel sometimes like thank you dumps the medicine rather than sits with what was just shared and the potency of it. And I just want to offer gratitude for what you just shared, each of you. Yeah, I have myriad questions, and I was going to ask about maybe because I'm sitting here in Central America and know each of you, what you're perceiving would be the liberation ontologies of our time, what you're seeing in movements and maybe peripheral vision and backspace that's actually moving in a way for liberation. And I'm just going to perhaps just invoke that in this space for all of us to sit with that question of this rich history of the blending of the spiritual and political practice that was here in Latin America at a time under liberation theology. And here we are in this moment. Those of us in Turtle Island know that the structures of capitalism got a little kick this past week. And showed some of the fault lines in the house of cards. And so as we recognize what's going on contextually, maybe we sit with the trouble and we sit with that question that we all kind of, our beating hearts are with: what is the liberation ontologies of our time? How do each of us blend the political and the spiritual practice and find our ways and honor the wisdom that each of these three, I would say, elders in the space, not olders, but elders, in what they've been tending. And so with the last 15 minutes that we have together, we felt to ask if there's someone in the group. Alnoor often invokes mystical anarchy etiquette to interrupt our pattern of social locating, of organization or project, but really get to the heart, get to the essence of what the curiosity is, of what the question is. That's an offering for the space and is an offering to these wisdom carriers, I would say right now, to continue to weave what were this inquiry around living transition pathways. So rather than me asking a question, we'll open it up. And that also includes Ashish, Marai, and Pat to ask each other questions as well as part of our circle of squares here today. So if you have a question, the three of you can just jump in, but if somebody else, if you put I think you put the little hand up. I think we all have enough Zoom literacy or not. If you can't, just write us in the chat. And our beloved Laura, who's here in the background supporting us, will bring you forward.
So here is where I feel like it's super, super critical, and I feel the wisdom of Elder Orland Bishop who I invoked earlier, when he's saying, so, okay, you're with this, we called this experiment of moving consciousness money, the third drawer. And he said, so yeah, it looks a little bit like a fund. You're putting money in the center and you're changing some of the rules about who decides. So, okay, good. But remember, it's not actually about the money. It's about the consciousness. It's about the relationship. It's about the trust. And so I feel like this is the work for me, is unhooking myself from the belief that, I said earlier that life is sequestered in the money, but is it? How can it be? So there's a place of realizing that it's not the money. It has never been the money. It can't be the money. And so the more that I've worked to make my source larger than money, larger than the laws that govern money, the more possibilities open up for being able to participate in liberation, in transition, in change. So it's I don't know that it's the only game in town, but it's a big part of it, because the more that I believe that the banks hold it all, I'm doomed. And so I just have to keep looking at this again: radical abundance, fearless generosity, earth. And the more that I align there, and I say, all these other authorities are going to bow to her authority eventually. We're watching it come. We're watching it come. So best for me to be aligning with that authority, not the false authorities. So there's a lot of release, as you said about Marai, about letting go of what we think it means to be human, and also letting go of what we think the construct is, and where we think we are. We're on Earth. What does that mean? What does that mean to be in interbeing? So, this is why I bring up that word. This is a word that just came to me about this omnibeneficence. And watching every other being out there not only benefit its own kind, not only further its own next 7 generations, but its very presence and way of going about being supports the whole. So I'm finding that the more that I move into the inquiry of how do I be omnibeneficent human, the more avenues and possibilities keep open that work, sometimes with money, sometimes with relationships, sometimes with land, sometimes with, it just keeps morphing. I mean, the creativity and evolution of Earth on her course, in her destiny, in her work and solar system, I'm hopping on that train, and it's just remarkable to me how it breaks down the logic of capitalism, of so many things. So I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Marai,
Stand
Ashish?
shining. Yeah, either of the others of you two. And I'll just say that this is part of what, if you really listen to what Women Stand Shining with Pat was offering, it's what we're invoking of living this transition pathway with the ontological shifts, with invoking these other ethics and ways of being that is coming forth.
Marai, do you want to go first this time before me?
Pat said it.
Yeah, no, she absolutely did. I mean, I think again, both of you just wonderfully lay the foundations for things. So I just maybe want to give a couple of one anecdote and then a couple of examples of where this is already happening. There are thousands of places where it's already happening, Stephen, in terms of what you're looking for. But the anecdote is that there's a colleague of ours in the US who teaches in a university, and she decided to do a very interesting exercise with students where she asked a class of 30 students to, for each one of them to list out their 3 major needs and 3 major offerings to others, right? And it was a very difficult exercise. You can see American students who've grown up in this intensely individualistic, selfish, capitalist society. Okay, so it took a little bit of time, but once they did it, and then she said, then you pair yourselves up in 2s or 3s or 4s, where you can meet the needs and what you can offer to each other. And at the end of 2 or 3 months of doing this, the students actually came back and said it was mind-bending, because they realized that there was so much that they could offer to each other and seek from each other without any money passing hands. Skills, expertise, labor, so much, right? And so in that sense, and now hearing that actually there are people trying to do this in 6 or 7 other universities around the world, just an exercise in skill sharing, time sharing, without thinking of money as being a medium of exchange. And so actually you begin to see in many parts of the world, especially where governments have failed or are failing, or where corporations have become extremely exploitative, where communities are coming back, including in especially the poorest sections of the communities in cities and villages, are rebuilding their economies of solidarity, which are not necessarily based on money, collective labor, having one machine for 20 families instead of every family owning it, etc. And you see more and more of this happening in transition towns across the world, in communities, etc. There's also a lot more experimentation at time sharing or time banking, as it's called, including in very capitalist societies. So how do you can get in Greece, for instance, a wonderful school run with very, very low fees, where even the poorest families can send their kids. The only reason it was able to do that was because the school was part of a community time banking process, in which many of the local residents offered some administrative and some teaching time to the school without charging any money, right? So you actually begin to see that when you locate something in a community that has sustained or has revived its spirit of community and collective work, then you can actually again do away with at least to some extent, with money. There's also alternative currencies which local communities can create and run for them, which stimulates the local economy and is in their own control, not in the control of the banks that you spoke about, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of this happening. Obviously, all of it is still marginal compared to the dominant system, but it shows us the potential of actually undermining the current system and creating these wonderful pluriverse of alternatives based on what Graham Gibson, the Australian two women who wrote so wonderful stuff on community economies, which actually still underlie our dominant economy, except it's just hidden because of the way we think of the economy in our current worldviews, current dominant systems. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashish. And maybe I'll just say, like, and make it very clear that capitalism itself is a self-terminating logic. There's no way around that, right? As the old quip goes, if you believe in infinite growth on a finite planet, you are either a madman or an economist. It's physically impossible, right? 3% growth, which is the minimum that's required to keep the house of cards afloat, means a doubling of the global economy every 24 years. And it's the first time economists and ecologists agree there will not be another doubling. So this economic system will die in our lifetime within one generation. And so the question that we sort of bring to the center is, how do we use capital in the short period of time it's valuable as a means of exchange, a means of organizing labor and time, et cetera, with all its flaws, all its destruction, extraction, coloniality, et cetera, to build post-capitalist infrastructure. The aim is not to reform central banks. The aim is not to reform debt-based currency. It's fundamentally a flawed strategy. We have one more question that comes from Suzanne Bowles. I don't know if Suzanne, you want to, yeah?
Yeah, Alnoor, just one piece, just because with this, we are evoking the philanthropic sector. I just want to say what Alnoor and I are seeing is not just the grant, but the actual whole of the endowment, and actually understanding that the hoarding of wealth at the end of this current time of where we are in the Anthropocene is actually a disease. It's a sickness. And so we're not trying to be prescriptive, but we do, if you go deeper into the work or the website and you're in the NGO or the philanthropic industrial complex, we are trying to point towards how these capitals flow and also speak to the shift of consciousness, the shift of ontology that's needed alongside of it, so it doesn't re-perpetuate the same power over kinds of paradigms. And or when I think about water not flooding, or we don't want to see flood zones and taking down, we actually want to see flow. So, and with that, maybe, yeah, I would say we bring forth Suzanne, if she wants to just speak the question into the space as a way that we can find our way towards closing today.
I can go with that one. Thank you, Suzanne. What gives me hope is a dreamscape. My ancestors give me hope, their survival strategies and how they travel with us. What gives me hope is this conversation, being in this circle of squares where, like 5 years ago, when Project Hala was started emerging, we didn't know, we had this sense that there were folk out there doing this stuff, but we didn't know, like as in with certainty. And now I'm like, there's loads of us, there's a whole community, the communities. That just gives me hope, and like mind blown all the time. And love gives me hope and feeds me, and my grandbabies.
Pat, would you like to? Right. So, I think for the last 45 years being involved with grassroots struggles on the ground, it always strikes me whenever I'm with communities that are fighting against big dams and mining and oppression and authoritarianism and so on, that in the midst of their struggles, even as sometimes they're being physically uprooted and evicted, they're still actually smiling, telling stories, being hopeful for their children, and actually creating wonderful alternatives in the middle of this kind of devastation that we're seeing. And I see that and I say, I'm actually privileged not to be in a situation where I might be evicted next, tomorrow. And so what right do I have to lose hope, given that those people in the midst of their struggles actually always retain hope and inspiration? So that's one thing that actually for me has sustained, and seeing the kinds of examples that I gave you on the ground has always been it's never been, I've never felt despondent or doomsday scenario kind of thing, knowing very well that of course there's collapses happening, but I don't think doomsday is the way I would like to look at it. And the second thing which always gives me hope and inspiration is of course the rest of nature, like that baby rhino whose picture I showed you. I think you just look out of the window and you see trees going through all the seasonal changes, flowering sometimes being quiet in the winter, etc. That's all inspiration and hope.
Thank you, Ashish. I guess I'll name a couple things. One is, and this also was something that was based on what Orland Bishop had to say at one point, but he was pointing out, I think, that money has made its way into everything, everything. And so he says, because my thought was like, let's just get rid of it, right? If we got rid of it, it would have to bring us back to, literally bring us back to earth, bring us back to the earth and her rhythm, her way. But he has this interesting thing to say, which is that, but if it's already everywhere, if we change its meaning, if we change our consciousness about it, if we change our relationship to it, in a way, it can be a vehicle to bring about change in everywhere, all at once. So I stay with that possibility. But I'm also going to say that, I didn't say earlier that I get the name Woman Stand Shining because I was adopted by the Lakota spiritual pathway, way of life, and been in that way for about 30 years now. But in that practice, over and over again, and I always talk about the Lakota genius here, we intentionally are brought to the end of our own personal resource, physically, every which way, but physically, which causes then mentally and emotionally and every other way. And so you come to this place where you've made a sacred vow to complete something that is physically impossible for you to complete unless you are met by what I call the larger community. And so it's that moment when you come to the end of your own resource that I say sometimes you fall against the mystery door and that mystery door swings open. I mean, this is a spiritual practice. And so when that happens, the vista, the view, the logics, the possibilities that come flowing out of that mystery door. I mean, that's what we are to base our lives on from that moment forward until the next time we find ourselves in that place. So this moment of coming to the end of our own resource is a profound, profound moment. And I believe that, yeah, that mystery door is going to swing open in all directions for different people who have that humility and willingness. And we don't know what's going to flow from there. And I want to know.
We've moved past the end of our Chronos time. We're now in Kairos time. Thank you for ending us in that way. May we all humble ourselves to listen for what is on the edge of that mystery door swinging open, what is at the end of our constructed individual separate selves, personal resource, and find our way into the web of life, into kinship with all relations. We have one more webinar in this series on April 14th with Bayo Akomolafe, and you'll get all the other things in that lovely thing called email, recording and links and prayers. And in this way, I'm going to ask my brother to finish us with a prayer for today, and just a very deep, profound bow of my heart beyond what the vibration of thank you can carry, to each of our speakers, to those of you who've been listening with generous hearts, but those of us who are staying with the trouble in these questions.
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you to our siblings and elders and teachers, Ashish, Marai, and Pat. I thought maybe just to close this with a short prayer that opens the book. We pray and trust that this dialogue serves the healing of all beings, including the fallen deity of money and its offspring, shadow, and alibi philanthropy. May the colonized mind and body be liberated, including our own. Shukran, everyone. And if speakers want to stay on for a few minutes of debrief, please do. Lynn and I will stay on, and yeah, we'll see everyone on April 14th, inshallah.
Namaste. Thank you, everybody.